As we talk about social development of adolescence, a lot of the information I'm going to be talking about is from the book The Promise of Adolescence by the National Academies of Science. And, just so you know, if you're interested in having more in depth reading on other topics about teens as well, this book is available for free online. You just have to register to get it. Teenagers spend a lot of time figuring out who they are and where they're going in life. Their capacity to think on a more mature level is increasing throughout their teen years, and their worldview expands so that they reflect on things in their lives, others in their lives, and then the way that things work in the world. They have to take in pretty complicated information to do that. And they also have to integrate information from a number of sources as they find their way. They often see the world in a different way than parents do. Not a surprise to you, I bet. And here's another thing that's probably not a surprise. Teens are often self-conscious about themselves, especially how they look, how their bodies are changing. Teens' friends are important in how they see themselves, and they place a lot of value on what their friends say for their own self-evaluation. But this doesn't mean that parents are not still very important, especially when they have warm relationships with their teens. They pay attention to their needs. They have high and, of course, reasonable expectations, and they provide support to their teenagers as needed. Having these strong, supportive relationships with their parents in early and mid-adolescence helps teens to develop a strong sense of self. Again, something that probably won't be that surprising. Teens might have sudden changes in their moods, and their emotions might be a little bit unpredictable. All of these might result in more conflict between parents and their kids. As the neurons between the emotional and executive function centers of the brain develop these stronger connections with each other, then lots of times we see a decrease in that moodiness of teenagers.
Teens may also be more sensitive to parental emotions, and they may misread what their parents are trying to express. They'll continue to get better at this, though, as they continue through the teen years, especially when they have supportive and well-regulated parents.
Conflict between parents and their teens can support teens as they're moving toward independence, and it can also help parents realize that they might need to shift their roles and expectations of their teens. Usually by mid to late adolescence, parents and their teens have figured a lot out and they get along much better. Research indicates that doing fun things together and having dinner together are two ways to encourage teens' well-being, as well as to decrease the likelihood of substance abuse or substance use. Time from parents seems to be the most important factor there. In early adolescence, we see a deepening of teens' understanding of themselves, and they can see themselves differently when they're with their parents versus when they're with friends versus when they're at school. We see this progress throughout childhood into adolescence. Children in the early school years are likely to describe themselves in black and white terms, and that's kind of demonstrating whether or not they feel capable. And then kids after around age 8 or so might begin to describe themselves more fully. They might talk about their personalities, their school skills, their friendship skills. It's not so black and white. And they often base these descriptions on their behaviors or the actions that they take. So they're seeing that they can be good at one thing and not as good at something else. For young teens, that understanding of themselves is continuing to deepen, but it's also kind of disjointed. Some teens have a dip in their self-esteem in the early teen years, and as teens get into the middle teen years, they might still have some disjointed pictures of who they are, but they're better able to manage and accept those inconsistencies by just sort of looking at themselves from almost like the outside of themselves, like looking from above in a way, That's using their metacognitive skills that continue to develop quite a bit in their teen years. We might see teens, though, who are stressed by the difference between who they are and who they want to be. Older teens have often come to terms with the variations in how they express themselves, realizing that it's a positive trait to be flexible in terms of responding in different situations. Older teens still find their friends to be very important, but they aren't as likely to base their self esteem on their friends' judgment of them. Older teens are better at taking the perspective of others and also at being attuned with others, especially when they have positive relationships with their parents and friends. As teens transition to early adulthood and they have new relationships and new experiences, like going into the workforce, college, romantic relationships, they continue to cement their sense of self. These changes in how teens understand themselves over time are related to the integration of the limbic, or the emotional centers of the brain, with the prefrontal cortex areas of the brain. Changes in the limbic center happen at about the same time that teens begin to explore more and get excited about trying new things, some of that sensation seeking. The developing a person's sense of identity seems to be related to ongoing changes in the brain from childhood through adolescence. As teens are making decisions, their sense of self plays a role, as do the cost and benefits that teens see. We also see teens often wanting more independence from their parents as they continue through their teen years. They also want to have new responsibilities, like having a job, as well as new experiences. They're often looking for adventures, which, as we discussed before, can be good if there are boundaries around those adventures or if they're safe adventures. But sometimes teens might look for adventures in not such safe places, and their reward centers in the brain take over instead of their good decision-making centers, the prefrontal cortex, especially when their friends are around. It's not just parents that teens want their independence from. They also have less time for their siblings because they're so busy with their lives and their friendships, activities, jobs, romantic relationships. But usually when they've had strong relationships with their sisters and brothers, the relationship's going to stay strong over time. Teens also begin navigating romantic relationships and their sexuality. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a later session. As teens negotiate their sense of identity, they do so within the context of the different groups that they belong to. So that might be based on gender, race, ethnicity, religious affiliation, sexuality, ability status, nationality, activities that they're involved in. You get the picture. And having a strong connection to something, some aspect of social identity, like those things I just mentioned, seems to predict psychological well-being. Going to school at more diverse middle schools and having more friends from other races is associated with being more positive toward those considered outsiders. It's also related to better social and academic competence, better mental health, and less social vulnerability. Perhaps this could be a really important time to introduce teens to new experiences, as well as people of different ethnicities.
Teens could be more likely to join some sort of out there or fringe group if they accept beliefs of other groups without questioning them at all. They just take things at face value. Or, potentially, if their personal beliefs are being threatened, then they may join some sort of fringe group.
Teens, of course, don't always know how to handle all their situations and their issues. And when they also lack support or knowledge, they might be at risk for more difficulties in forming their identity, becoming involved in relationships, having more responsibilities, and having financial concerns. Teens, in the end, they establish a balance between their developing autonomy and being connected with their families during adolescence. Immigrant teens may have a stronger sense of family obligations that they need to complete than teens from non-immigrant families. And there's some research out there that indicates that the reward centers of the brains of Latino immigrant adolescents lit up more when they allocated cash for their family members than rather than for themselves, while the reward centers of white teenagers' brains lit up more when they allocated cash for themselves rather than their families. Just something interesting to know about these different populations.